realities, and then you can do the test, Ravi. In fact, if the turnout is less, we can defer the test to tomorrow, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. अशोक जी आप पढ़ना चाहते हो?
Okay. Jai Baba.
जय बाबा.
Thank you for this opportunity. Jai Baba.
जय बाबा.
The 7 realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following 7 realities. 1. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. 2. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. 3. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. 4. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. 5. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so-called bad, in saint and in so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward, when compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. 7. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Thank you so much. We start on a very grim note this morning with quite a few losses of loved ones in the last week. Especially one that comes to mind, which is a loved one, a person with direct contact with Baba, Mr. Dhar, father of Sunil and Rajesh Dhar, who have been with us. So my prayers and best comfort to the family before we start our session. Maybe we can spend a minute of silence. Apart from that, Sherry, apart from her personal ailment itself and her immediate family being affected by the virus, she also had quite a few bereavements, and then she has had two more shocks in the last week. So let us all put our hands together and pray for a minute, and then start for the day. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. So I think there are questions that have been readied for 2 chapters, correct?
1 chapter.
one chapter. Okay. So, what should we do? Leave it to Ravi and Mamaji to decide whether you want to do it today or you leave it to the next week. Because the turnout is lesser, and I'm missing quite a few people who might derive benefit from the test itself.
Jai Baba, good morning.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. I'm thinking maybe we should postpone it to next week when we have more people. We can
I
do
agree.
this.
I agree. Mamaji, you're okay with that? You're the
I'm okay.
Mamaji is the one who formed these questions, so we should check with him too.
It's
Mamaji
okay.
said okay.
We can have it next week.
Okay, good.
And I may be disturbed today. I have some other things in between. I may not be on also. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's continue the reading then. So we ended at the chapter on selfless service, and we continue with 94, page 94 on the physical book, Avenues to Understanding. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Spirit not understood through mind. Requesting again for your mics to be muted. The different avenues that lead to spiritual understanding can be understood best through an initial distinction between spirit and matter. In order to understand matter, we have material means, and in order to understand the spirit, we have spiritual means. Matter is, yeah.
You have finished reading this last week, right?
Oh, sorry. Yes. I think
So we can
the
have
next
some
chapter.
discussion. We can have some discussion on this.
Yes,
this is
yes.
a very, very
In
important chapter.
In fact, that's exactly what we wanted to do. Correct.
Or I don't mind going to the next chapter. Looks very interesting. What is next chapter? Oh my goodness, problem. Just a joke.
Yeah. No, I think we abruptly ended reading this because it was at the end of the session. So thanks for pointing it out. So let's just discuss quickly on this chapter and then continue from there. So anybody wants to summarize this chapter?
I think we should have a discussion on this. So here, Baba compares with the mind and the spirit, right? See, what is mind? Mind is nothing a receptacle, because it is on its own doesn't exist anything. Mind doesn't have any entity except for the collection of all the experiences we have, all the sanskaras put together. Let's say if we put some balls in a basket, or we made it into a big ball by glue, and each ball representing our experience, and that entity we call it mind. But if you take out all these experiences, then there is no such thing as mind. And that is the one which is coming in between for us to experience the God, mind. And but can we not use the mind? That's the only vehicle we have. There's the only tool we have to use. And what are the parts of the mind? There are three parts of the mind. One is it generates thoughts. We get thoughts. And it has got the emotional part of it. Feelings. Feeling of love is also part of that. Feeling of anger, jealousy, happiness, all these things, feelings. And most importantly, actually, it is categorized as a separate entity, the intellectual part. Buddhi. In Sanskrit, they say buddhi. Buddhi, they categorize separately. So we have the buddhi, we use it extracting the knowledge base what we have in our mind. So that's why they suggest we have to use the intellect. But Baba's here, it says love is a lot more important than intellect. But we have to make a balance. Wherever we have to use intellect, that's where we have to use the intellect. But as far as the spirit is concerned, the only language we have to use is love. So we have to use appropriate tool for appropriate situation. That is my understanding. And also intellect, it cannot be a leader. The love has to be the leader. Love has to be, in some other chapter, Baba explained, love has to be the driver of the car, and all the other things like wheels and chairs and all these machines and everything, they follow wherever the driver takes the car. So that is the gist of briefly what I get it from this.
Very brilliant summary, and I think you covered it well. Any others? So I think we have had multiple analogies that talk about how the mind is a necessary evil. We have the scaffolding, we have the pole vault. So it is required for us to proceed in the journey. Easiest way is let love take over. But that's if that's not happening, then it takes longer, and the journey needs the mind till a particular point, and then you go to a point where you don't need the mind, and then go on to the full course of union, right? So that is what is being said here. So specifically, I'll just read the subtitles so that we know what is covered here. So spirit is not understood through the mind. So again, reference to heart. Concepts of mind toward inadequate for spirit. Concepts of mind towards matter are inadequate for spirit. And then you have conflict between the mind and the heart. Mind craves assurance or conviction, and that's because of our conditioning. So and here he talks even about the types of conviction. I mean, the importance of how some people want miracles, right? And he gives an example. I mean, he explains that he does not want such people. Intellectual conviction hinders spontaneous love, right? And then spirit glimpsed only through heart. Freedom from wants possible only in the supramental existence. Conditions for harmony between mind and heart. And heart must be free to determine ends of life. Harmony of mind and heart implies cooperative functioning. So that's what is here. Any thoughts, any questions before we proceed?
You know, last 2 days, last week, whole week, I've been very busy with my work, and this technologist is supposed to take a CT and send it to me, and he did not take it properly. I did not get the proper CT images. I was really mad one evening, and I found out that he left. So if I find him, probably I would have thrashed him. I'm glad I found out in the evening. Then I started thinking, you know, why should I shout? I stepped back, and I just observed my own thinking. If I shout at him, he'll feel bad and whatever, you know, next time he'll be careful. Oh, he's going to shout at me, so I got to be careful. But that should not that should not be my approach. How can I use my love? How can I use in a proper way so that the goal is next time you should remember to do it carefully, and at the same time I do not want to hurt somebody's, even though they do mistakes, I do not want to hurt somebody. That thinking part gave me a lot of strength, and next time I approached it, and I worded it in such a way. I worded it carefully, and that person did again, and I was happy with my achievement of not acting immediately and acting slowly. I think for every situation, if we do this as Baba lovers, I think it is our responsibility to, for our own good, to take any situation, how can we use love in this situation? That practice really takes us to a different height. That's what I feel.
Round of applause. Very nice. Practical use of something very, very simple yet profound. I think very nice example, Ravi. The fact that, of course, thank you, Baba, for putting it in the bottom of the pile so that you got it in the evening. Otherwise, I shudder to think what would have happened to the guy.
I would not hesitate to yell, you guys know that, right?
So that way, I think, but I think it's a very, very good example, and I think we can all derive confidence and from the fact that it's easy to apply. He just did it in a simple, practical example, and of course, I'm missing Sanjay here, corporate examples, but the fact is it's highly contextualized. But love will overcome anything. If we are actually able to understand the situation correctly, understand the people correctly, and in that context, apply love and react to the situation and respond in the right way, I'm sure we will overcome and make it a positive outcome in the next one. So beautiful example. Others, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Karthik, it's a beautiful example, and what you can achieve with love cannot be achieved with anything else, and so that you have some sort of empathy, and probably that has got a longer term effect and impact, and at the same time, it is intelligent action.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Vipul.
Yes,
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
How do I should address myself? How do I become grounded in love? That, even if I see a difficult situation, for example, what is happening outside right now, we say it is that guy's fault, it is this guy's fault, and things like that. But I think if we are grounded in love, we will probably see it in a different light altogether. And love should flow from the heart, not at the intellectual level. You got what I'm saying? Love is not a thought. Love is an emotion.
Yeah, we had the same question last week with Modi's group. Jimmy Modi is the one who is reading Baba's books, and I attend that in the mornings. For me, in the morning. For them in India, it's evening. Same question was asked, and these thoughts I expressed. We can easily find out, Prime Minister Modi didn't do this, and this minister didn't do this, all these things. First of all, we have to understand this pandemic is all these months, nothing happened to India. And whereas it affected Italy, America, and all these countries, and suddenly now it's impacting the India. And how do people can come up with immediate solutions so that they can control this? They are not, right? And it's almost impossible what to do. The second thing is, as a spiritual Baba lovers, what we have to understand is, what did Baba say? Nothing moves without my will. Not even leaf moves without the will of the God. It is there. So it is not the people who we think that they are controlling the whole thing. It is the God that is controlling the whole thing. And Baba also said, if at all you want to blame, blame me. Don't blame others. Based on this, I say this is all Baba's letting it go. And there must be some reason why he is letting his children suffer. We are all his children, right? We are all his own images. And he is letting us suffer. There must be some reason why we are being suffered. That is my answer. And others can also respond on that. Jai Baba.
Very good answer, Ravi. But I think we have to help people a little more. And I'm struggling with the same thing that people is asking, right? So how do you apply love and practically try to use it in the context of what we are going through? And I'm actually struggling with it personally. I do not know what I can do in the context that I find myself in to be of help. And is it money? Is it physical service? I want to be able to do something, and I think that is the journey of discovery each one of us has to do in trying to understand in true love every soul that is passing away, every soul that is going through hard times now needs a support, and that soul need not be related to you. And if we are able to spend a few minutes, few hours, or whatever is possible from our hands, given our other schedules, towards helping the others, I think then we are living that message of love. We are putting that message of love and Baba's words to action. And I don't have a set formula. I don't have ideas on how I can help, but this is something that keeps me up at night in the last week or two more than ever. Right? That's my thought, Vipul.
A small reaction to what Ravi told. Say, if God is willing and God does everything, then God has also made us to think, and He has given us a mind to think also. So we need to act according to His will, means we need to put in some effort from our end also. We can't just take everything as God's will, and that becomes a resigned attitude. I don't think we need to be active in the sense that we should be able to understand what is God's will and try to help the whole, say, the society in our own way, in our own individual way. It need not be, say, blaming somebody. It can be some sort of help that whatever we can do at our level, that should be thought of. So, say, in any situation, there should be a balance of mind and heart. Heart cannot take a, say, primary role immediately. Mind has to flow in and then try to do, but this should be modified with the say, heart behind that. So the ultimate reasoning should be coming from the heart, but the action has to be through mind. So say that Baba does everything, that is a fact, but should we leave it to Baba everything every time and say I am not involved in this? So that is a bit difficult for me to take. De Baba.
Good sensitivity brought out by Mama, but I think it's also two pronged in the sense that even in the fact that you do not, what you're saying is you cannot be fatalistic about it and just say I just resign to what is panning out. And I think it is time for intelligent action. It is time
Yes.
for us to contribute constructively, but again with the fact that love should be above everything, right? So the only tweak I'd like to make is I think the mind has its role, but we should be driven more by what the heart feels and act, and use intelligent action whereby we are doing truly selfless service as we learned in the last chapter, and try to be of use rather than just spreading the negativity and consuming this negativity and talking about this in a negative way is all I feel.
Yes.
Jai Baba.
Yeah, Khalid.
Khalid here. Yeah, coming back to Vipul's query, how to remain grounded in love. I personally, my take with my limited understanding is that, there are no fixed parameters. And for each, there may be, various ways of dealing with it. Ravi, what he says is also a way of doing it. Mamaji's observations are also well accepted. Yeah, I just wanted to put, how I try to deal with it. I just try to, simply train my mind and always try to think that the person in front of me is a reflection of me. So I treat myself better and I love myself better. So if that is the way I follow, when it is a case of chaotic, a case of any such situations. So before I go on to put a situation on somebody else head or blame him, I always say when Baba says that, I and you are not different, it's we. It's not you, it's not me, but it's we. So when I put myself as in the other person's place, I'm putting Baba there. When I'm putting Baba there, the love, the care, everything comes automatically to me. It may be different for others, but I was just sharing the way I approach it. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Yeah, Baba. Simple. What are your thoughts in
Jai Baba.
response?
Yeah, I agree with Mamaji also and what Ravi and Khalid have said. And you also said that action has to take place, which is the part of the mind. So if you look at the harmony of mind and heart implies cooperative functioning, what is there on the screen. So mind will probably drive the action, right? Heart is the emotion which should be along with the mind, not as a pity, but as a pure love, something like that, as pure love, as a pure emotion of love, that the mind gets driven to do something for others. So
I
I
would
think
like
both
to,
work hand in hand.
yeah,
Yeah, Mamaji.
I would like to read a sentence in the page 98. So the last sentence in the second paragraph, heart must be free to determine ends of life, that particular subsection. The mind has a place in practical life, but its role begins after the heart has had its say. That's what, so you have to say, actually all practical work is done through mind. Without mind, we cannot do any intelligent or unintelligent action. So all the action stems through, starts off only and gets affected only through mind. But the feeling or the emotion that we should help others, or we should be empathetic to this situation, all these things ebbs or flows from the heart. So once it starts off there, that feeling or emotion, it should be put into action only through mind. So there should be a proper blend between them. So if you are, say, just feeling and keeping quiet, it is not going to be of any help to anyone. So that feeling should be translated into an intelligent action, and that is done only through mind. So we have to blend them in such a way that it is fruitful to the whole society, starting from the individual to the surrounding and to the ultimately to the whole of society. Jai Baba.
Yeah, the
Thank you,
heart,
Mamaji. Jai Baba.
the heart, what you call, arises the goal for a feeling,
Yeah.
whether you need to help somebody love it, it arises, and the mind shows you the path, how to achieve it.
Yes, yes.
So the basic feeling of love, the basic feeling of compassion, the basic feeling of reaching out, whatever we term it, it has to arouse from the heart. Yes, the mind thereafter takes over. It just shows you the path depending on your own sanskaras, how you interpret it, and it shows you how to reach that goal. Jai Baba.
Great. I think great
Thank you, Jai
discussion.
Baba. Very good discussion.
Yes, thank you. So with that, I think can we go to the next chapter?
Yes.
Sure. So page 99 on the book, Problem of Sex. Element of sex. Sex is decidedly one of the most important problems with which the human mind is confronted in the domain of duality. It is one of the givens in the makeup of human nature that one has to deal with. Like everything else in human life, sex comes to be judged through the opposites, which are the necessary creations of the limited mind. Just as the mind tries to fit life into a scheme of alternatives, such as joy or pain, good or bad, solitude or company, attraction or repulsion, in re- attraction or repulsion in relation to sex, it tends to think of indulgence and repression as alternatives from which there is no escape. It seems as if the mind must accept the one alternative or the other, yet it cannot wholeheartedly accept either. When it tries repression, it is dissatisfied with its lot and longingly thinks of indulgence. When it tries indulgence, it becomes conscious of its bondage to the senses and seeks freedom by going back to mechanical repression. The mind remains dissatisfied with both alternatives, and there thus arises one of the most vital and complicated problems of human life. Opposites of indulgence and repression. In order to solve the problem of sex, the mind must first understand that both alternatives are equally the creation of imagination, working under the deluding influence of craving. Craving is implicitly present in the repression of sex as well as its gratification. Both result in the vitiation of consciousness through lust or the desire for sensations. The mind is therefore inevitably restless in either alternative. Just as just as when there are clouds in the sky, there is gloom and lack of sunshine, whether it rains or not. So, when the human mind is shrouded by craving, there is a diminution of being and lack of true happiness, whether this craving is gratified or not. The mind, when restless with desire, creates an illusory idea of happiness in the gratification of desire, and then, knowing that the soul remains dissatisfied even after gratification of desire, seeks freedom through repression. Thus, searching for happiness and freedom, the mind gets caught up in the opposites of indulgence and repression, which it finds equally disappointing. Since it does not try to go beyond these opposites, its movement is always from one opposite to the other, and consequently from one disappointment to another. False promises of opposites. Thus, craving falsifies the operation of imagination and presents the mind with the option between the alternatives of indulgence and repression, which prove to be equally deceptive in their promise of happiness. However, in spite of alternate and repeated disappointment in indulgence as well as in repression, the mind usually does not renounce the cause of unhappiness, which is craving. Hence, while experiencing disappointment in repression, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of gratification, and while experiencing disappointment in gratification, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of purely mechanical repression. It's a brilliant explanation of how this works, right? Renunciation of craving through awakening. This is like moving within a cage. The gateway to the spiritual path of internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving remains closed for those who have not the good fortune to be awakened by a perfect master. True awakening is the entering into the path of wisdom, which in course of time surely leads to the freedom and abiding happiness of life eternal. Internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving is as different from mechanical repression as it is from indulgence. Mind turns to the mechanical repression of craving because of disappointment, but it turns to internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving because of disillusionment or awakening. So, this is because of disillusionment or awakening. I would have thought it's only awakening, but anyway, I'll continue. Understanding craving. Anybody has anything to say? I have a mic that's unmuted.
Yeah, Karthik.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. I was going to Listen Humanity, and they have
Sure.
differentiated between love and lust. So, if it's okay, I'll be reading up 2-3 paragraphs from Listen Humanity, which is relevant here.
Sure.
Yeah, can I start?
Yeah. Do you want me to open it up?
No, I have the. Oh, you can open it up. It's page 188 in the physical copy. It's the Love and God
Sure.
chapter. I can read from my book as well. Whatever.
Yeah, you can read.
Yeah, I'll read, but you can, for others, you can make it page 188 of the physical copy. Yeah. This is love is different from lust. Which page it is? Yeah. You got it. It's here. This love is different from lust. And I think it's relevant here because it's a cross reference.
Sure.
So it says love is different from lust. In lust, there is dependence upon the physical object and thus spiritual subordination of the soul to it. Love puts the soul into direct coordinate relation with the reality which lies behind the form. Therefore, lust is experienced as being heavy, but love is experienced as being light. In lust, there is narrowing down of life, while in love, there is expansion in being. To have loved one's soul is like adding its life to your own. Your life is multiplied and you live virtually in two centers. If you love the whole world, you live vicariously in the whole world. But in lust, there is ebbing of life and generation of a sense of hopeless dependence upon a form which is regarded as another. Thus, in lust, there is accentuation of separateness and suffering, but in love, there is feeling of unity and joy. Lust is dissipation, love is recreation. Lust is a craving of the senses, love is the expression of spirit. Lust seeks fulfillment, but love experiences fulfillment. In lust, there is excitement. In love, there is tranquility. I think it is relevant here. I hope it gives us a little more perspective.
Very
Sure.
beautiful. Very beautiful.
Very,
Yeah.
very appropriate. But I think let's not lose sight of the way Baba has built up what has happened. I mean, the problem of sex right now. So he talks about mechanical repression. He talks about indulgence and repression being two opposites. He talks about how both are actually driven and motivated by the craving that the mind has, right? And the only way to unlock craving is through awakening, which is through the gift of a perfect master. So that's what we've learned till now in this chapter. Any other points before I can continue?
There's talks of going beyond the opposites. So it's a renunciation of craving that the central say cause for your requirement or things like that. You have to go beyond that and then try to say dissolve that craving itself. So that is what is being talked here. So it is neither repression nor indulgence is going to be of any benefit, because everybody realizes that on their own. Then what is the solution? So usually we talk of the opposites, but here we are trying to, Baba is telling us to go beyond the opposites, go to the reason for the actual opposites existing. That is because of the craving. So if you go and attack the craving by trying to look at it in a spiritual way and then try to remove that craving, then it will be, so there can be disillusionment in for somebody who tries to remove that craving, but it should be through spiritual awakening. That's what he is telling. But that needs some more explanation or understanding for us to take the message. Maybe it is made clear later in the chapter. Hey, Baba.
Correct. Yeah, that could be a way of seeing these two together. Yeah, it's a disillusionment, which is yeah. Anyway, I will continue. The need for indulgence or mechanical repression arises only when the nature of craving is not clearly grasped. When aspirants become fully awake to the inevitable bondage and suffering entailed by craving, they begin voluntarily to disburden themselves of craving through intelligent understanding. The subtitle is Understanding Craving. The question of indulgence or repression arises only when there is craving. The need for both vanishes with the complete disappearance of craving. When the mind is free from craving, the mind can no longer be moved by the false promises of indulgence or mechanical repression. Restraint nearer to freedom than indulgence is the subtitle. However, it should be borne in mind that the life of freedom is nearer to the life of restraint than to the life of indulgence, though in quality it is essentially different from both. Hence, for aspirants, a life of strict celibacy is preferable to married life if restraint comes to them easily without undue sense of self-repression. Such restraint is difficult for most persons and sometimes impossible, and for them, married life is decidedly more helpful than a life of celibacy. For ordinary persons, married life is undoubtedly advisable unless they have a special aptitude for celibacy. Possibilities of celibacy or marriage. Just as the life of celibacy requires and calls forth the development of many virtues, married life in turn also nourishes the growth of many spiritual qualities of utmost importance. The value of celibacy lies in the habit of restraint, and the sense of detachment and independence it gives. But as long as the mind is not altogether free from craving, there is no true freedom. In the same way, the value of marriage lies in the lessons of mutual adjustment and the sense of unity with the other. True union or dissolution of duality is possible, however, only through divine love, which can never dawn as long as there is the slightest shadow of lust or craving in the mind. Only by treading the path of inner and spontaneous renunciation of craving is it possible to attain true freedom and unity. Path of perfection open through celibacy or marriage. For those who are celibate as well as for married persons, the path of inner life is the same. When aspirants are drawn by the truth, they long for nothing else. And as the truth increasingly comes within their ken, they gradually disburden themselves of craving. Whether in celibacy or in marriage, they are no longer swayed by the deceptive promises of indulgence or mechanical repression, and they practice internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving until they are freed from the deceptive opposites. The path of perfection is open to aspirants whether in celibacy or in marriage, and whether they begin from celibacy or from marriage will depend upon their sanskaras and karmic ties of the past. They cheerfully accept the conditions that their past lives have determined for them and utilize these conditions for spiritual advancement in the light of the ideal they have come to perceive. Necessity of clear choice. Aspirants must choose one of the two courses that are open to them. They must take to a life of celibacy or to a married life and must avoid at all costs a cheap compromise between the two. Promiscuity in sexual gratification is bound to land the aspirants in the most pitiful and dangerous chaos of ungovernable lust. As such, diffused and undirected lust wields the higher values, it perpetuates entanglement and creates in the spiritual path insuperable difficulties to the internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving. Sex in marriage is entirely different from sex outside marriage. In marriage, the sanskaras of lust are much lighter and capable of being removed more easily. When a sexual relationship is accompanied by a sense of responsibility, love, and spiritual idealism, conditions for the sublimation of sex are much more favorable than when it is cheap and promiscuous. Dangers of promiscuity. In promiscuity, the temptation to explore the possibilities of mere sexual contact is formidable. It is only by the maximum restriction of the scope of mere sex that aspirants can arrive at any real understanding of the values attainable through the gradual transformation of sex into love. If the mind tries to understand sex through increasing the scope of sex, there is no end to the delusions to which it is prey, for there is no end to the enlarging of its scope. In promiscuity, the suggestions of lust are necessarily the first to present themselves to the mind, and the individuals are doomed to react to people within the limitation of this initial perversion and thus close the door to deeper experiences. Truth cannot be grasped by skipping over the surface of life and multiplying superficial contacts. It requires the preparedness of mind, which can center its capacities upon selected experiences and free itself from its limiting features. This process of discrimination between the higher and the lower, and the transcendence of the lower in favor of the higher, is made possible through wholehearted concentration and a real and earnest interest in life. Infinity attainable through marriage is the subtitle. Such wholehearted concentration and real interest is necessarily precluded when the mind becomes a slave to the habit of running at a tangent and wandering between many possible objects of similar experience. In married life, the range of experience to be had in the company of the partner is so wide that the suggestions of lust are not necessarily the first to present themselves to the mind. There is therefore a real opportunity for the aspirants to recognize and annul the limiting factors in experience. By the gradual elimination of lust and the progression through a series of increasingly richer experiences of love and sacrifice, they can finally arrive at infinity. So, yeah. So I think any questions on this discussion?
Sex is part of the human life, right? And the main purpose of the sex is to procreate. That is the main thing. And what I'm wondering is, when certain people are in certain age, when they're getting married, and it is natural to have that attractions and all. So why did Baba continue to create these lustful feelings in the human beings even after a certain age? That's my question. If anybody can help me.
I think that is answered in this chapter. So that's driven by the wrong understanding of values and focus on craving. And second aspect could be the sanskaric load. The sanskaric load. Mm-hmm. The sanskaric load causes it to linger longer than the role of procreation, which is in the early years, and as you said, may not be required in the later years. But then, in the cases where it continues, either it is a case of craving and falling prey to craving, and second is sanskaric load. That's my two cents.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
We have to see this in the background of evolution itself. So there is an absolute need for sex in the evolutionary process. Otherwise, the human species would not have arrived at where it has arrived now. And as Baba says, this is the temple of God which can drive us to realization. So to achieve this goal, sex was a driving force in evolution. And over the period, this has maintained the evolutionary process of conversion of species to the flowering of the human species ultimately. So once this realization or the awareness of this process starts happening in the human generation over a period of reincarnation, so this urge on sex gradually comes down. So that is the spiritual journey also. So the gradual reduction of the craving, and then the identification that craving is the central problem here, and then trying to say remove that is actually a spiritual path and a growth in spiritual path. That's what is happening in multiple reincarnation, and then later on involution drives it from the physical grass to the subtle and also the mental planes. So this is what is a progression, and if we are aware of this, we are sailing in the proper path, I think. So that is my take on this. Hey, Baba.
Yeah.
Yeah, both evolution of form needs sex, and that's what Ravi also said. Procreation is a natural necessity. But yeah, the recognition of the true nature of true role of this and the fact of not succumbing to craving is what spiritual progress helps you achieve. And yeah, and I think we understand also from this on the type of souls that need marriage, the type of souls that can do without marriage and take on a life of celibacy. And these are things that the youth, before they make the decisions, should be aware of. And these are, it will be such a big contributor to their decision and clarity. But unfortunately, not just in our country, but in the whole world, the spirituality is often resigned to a post-retirement pastime, right? So, whereas it has to be taught in schools and colleges, right? That's just a rant from me. Yeah.
See, from our ancient Hinduism, from ancient times, Shiva is prayed to Shivalinga. Shivalinga. And the reason is that is where when the humans generate the maximum energy. It's the representation of the energy. And also there's a story, Shiva had a curse from Prajapati. Prajapati was Indra, right? Who is a Prajapati? Anybody has some sense?
Brahma.
Brahma.
I think.
Prajapati. Yeah, Brahma. And he had a curse from Brahma that nobody will pray to your form, and they will pray only to your linga. That's why people pray to Shivalinga. And Shiva also had a curse on Brahma, so that nobody will pray to Brahma anywhere, except there are 2 temples in the whole world. One is in India, I believe, and one is, guess where it is? Las Vegas. Las Vegas on the Strip.
Is that a joke?
No, it's not joke. It is not joke. I happened to go to some training into Las Vegas.
You don't have
I happened to stay in for 3 weeks in Las Vegas.
Whoa!
And
that's
I must
some
have
training,
passed
man. Las Vegas for 3 weeks. That's wild.
You don't have to explain that.
Yeah.
Why you went.
I hated that Strip. So many people. Oh my God, I hated that so much. The only thing that I enjoyed in that Strip is there is a Bellagio hotel there, and opposite to that there are like fountains, and they put a music and the fountains play the water with the music. That's one thing. It's very beautiful. That's the only thing I enjoyed. Rest of it, I hated it. So I walked so many times in front of that Brahma temple. I thought some statue there. But later on, when I came back, somebody asked, have we had a situation to talk about this? And then the one person had gone at that time, and he took a picture and sent me. This is the Brahma temple in Las Vegas. Then I realized, oh my God, I was there. I saw it. I didn't even go there to attend that. Yeah. But
so what's the so why did they even put that temple there? I don't get it.
I don't know who put it, and I'm not sure why did they put it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's all sin city. All the sins are made there. So I thought nobody prays to Brahma. Okay, let's create Brahma here. That's probably one of the reasons. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Interesting. I have never heard of this.
Yeah, some Indonesian person is the priest there.
Wow. Okay.
Not even Indian Hindu. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So with that,
Uh,
let's.
uh, I have two sentences which need some stress. I will just read them. So
Sure.
page 102, the top paragraph. Yes, the path of perfection is open to aspirants whether in celibacy or in marriage, and whether they begin from celibacy or from marriage will depend upon their sanskaric and karmic ties of the past. This is an important sentence, I feel. Next is in the next paragraph, last sentence, last two sentences, I think. In marriage, the sanskaras of lust are much lighter and are capable of being removed more easily. When a sexual relationship is accompanied by a sense of responsibility, love, and spiritual idealism, conditions for the sublimation of sex are much more favorable than when it is in cheap and unpromiscuous. So there is an importance for, say, married life given here. Yeah, Baba.
Yeah, our samskaric burden has led us here, and we're dealing with it. You're a lucky one. Your samskaric burdens didn't have it.
I don't know.
Mama might be having 2 or 3 wives in his previous life. That's why he's having celibacy.
Yeah. So with that, let's continue. So this is related to the problem of sex, the sanctification of married life. And again, as I said, these are two chapters that young people should be reading well before they launch into their married lives. It's a good way of understanding what the true nature of marriage is, right? So, physical book, page 104, Sanctification of Married Life. Married life, a spiritual enterprise. So he starts with a very provocative line. Married life is a spiritual enterprise. So most persons enter into married life as a matter of course, but marriage will become a help or a hindrance according to the manner in which it is handled. There is no doubt that some immense spiritual possibilities are accessible through married life, but all this depends upon having the right attitude. From the spiritual point of view, married life will be a success only if it is thoroughly determined by the vision of truth. It cannot offer much if it is based upon nothing more than the limited motives of mere sex, or if it is inspired by considerations that usually prevail in a business partnership. It has to be undertaken as a real spiritual enterprise that is intended to discover what life can be at its best. When the two partners launch together upon the spiritual adventure of exploring the higher possibilities of the spirit, they cannot at the outset limit their experiment by any nice calculations concerning the nature and amount of individual gain. Married life is utterly different from promiscuity. Married life always makes many demands upon both partners for mutual adjustment and understanding, and creates many problems that were not originally expected. Though this might, in a sense, be true of life in general, it is particularly true of married life. In married life, two souls get linked in many ways, with the result that they are called upon to tackle the whole complex problem of personality rather than any simple problem created by some isolated desire. This is precisely why married life is utterly different from promiscuous sexual relations. Promiscuous sex attempts to separate the problem of sex from other needs of the developing personality and seeks to solve it in isolation from them. Although this kind of solution might seem to be easy, it turns out to be very superficial and has the further disadvantage of sidetracking aspirants from attempting the real solution. Married life calls forth sublimation. The relative values of the various sides of the limited personality can best be appreciated when they become intertwined and appear in varied settings and perspectives. It is difficult to discriminate between them if they appear fitfully in a disconnected series. In married life, there is ample room for varied experience, with the result that the different tendencies latent in the mind begin to organize around the crystallized scheme of married life. This organization of varied purposes not only provides an unlimited field for discrimination between the higher and lower values, but also creates between them a necessary tension, which requires and calls forth effective and intelligent sublimation. Conditions of marriage precipitate changes in inner life. In one sense, married life may be looked upon as the intensification of most human problems. Standalone, I like that line. I'm kidding. I'll read again. In one sense, married life may be looked upon as the intensification of most human problems. As such, it becomes the rallying ground of the forces of bondage as well as for the forces of freedom, the factors of ignorance as well as the factors of light. As the married life of ordinary persons is determined by mixed motives and considerations, it inevitably invites an uncompromising opposition between the higher and the lower self. Such opposition is necessary for the wearing out of the lower self and the dawning of the true divine self. Married life develops so many points of contact between two souls that severance of all connection would mean the unsettlement and disarrangement of practically the whole tenor of life. Since this difficulty of breaking away from one another invites and precipitates inner readjustment, marriage is really a disguised opportunity for the souls to establish a real and lasting understanding that can cope with the most complex and delicate situations. Married life must be in line with the divine plan. The spiritual value of married life is directly related to the nature of the preponderant factors that determine its daily course. If it is based upon shallow considerations, it can deteriorate into a partnership in selfishness aimed against the rest of the world. If it is inspired by lofty idealism, it can rise to a fellowship that not only requires and calls forth increasingly greater sacrifices for each other, but actually becomes a medium through which the two souls can offer their united love and service to the whole of humanity. When married life is thus brought into direct line with the divine plan for the evolution of the individuals, it becomes a pure blessing for the children who are the fruit of the marriage. For they have the advantage of absorbing a spiritual atmosphere from the very beginning of their earthly career. Important points being made here. Married life is enriched by children. Though the children are thus the beneficiaries of the married life of the parents, the married life of the parents is in its turn enriched by the presence of the children. Children give to parents an opportunity for expressing and developing a real and spontaneous love in which sacrifice comes easy and delightful. And the part played by children in the life of parents is of tremendous importance for the spiritual advancement of the parents themselves. It therefore follows that when children make their appearance in married life, they ought to be wholeheartedly welcomed by the parents. Birth control. In view of the claims that children have on married lives, birth controls deserves careful attention and critical examination. The question must not be considered from the point of view of any one special or limited interest, but from the standpoint of the ultimate well-being of the individuals and society. The right opinion in this respect, as in all respects, must above everything be based on spiritual considerations. The attitude that most persons have towards birth control is oscillating and confused because it contains an admixture of good and bad elements. While birth control is right in its aim of securing the regulation of population, it is disastrously unfortunate in the choice of its means. There can be no doubt that the regulation of childbearing is often desirable for personal and social reasons. Uncontrolled breeding intensifies the struggle for existence and may bring about a social order where ruthless competition becomes inevitable, apart from creating a responsibility for parents which they may be unable to adequately discharge. It becomes an indirect and contributory cause of crime, war, and poverty. Though humane and rational considerations demand and justify all serious attempts to regulate the birth of children, the use of physical means for securing this purpose remains fundamentally indefensible and unjustifiable. Physical means remove the incentive for mental control. The purely physical means generally advocated by the supporters of birth control are most objectionable from the spiritual point of view. Although the physical means of birth control are advocated on humanitarian grounds, they are almost always used by the generality of people to serve their own selfish ends and to avoid the responsibility of bearing and bringing up children. Since the physical consequences of yielding to lust can be so successfully avoided through the use of these means, those who have not begun to awaken to the higher values have no incentive to moderation in the gratification of passion. They thus become victims of excessive indulgence and bring about their own physical, moral, and spiritual ruin by neglecting mental control and becoming slaves to animal passion. Mental control, indispensable for rising from passion to peace. The easy use of physical means obscures the spiritual side of the question and is far from contributory to the awakening of individuals to their real dignity and freedom as spiritual beings. Thoughtless and uncontrolled indulgence must inevitably lead to reaction and spiritual bondage. For spiritual aspirants in particular, but also for human beings, because they are all potentially spiritual aspirants, it is extremely inadvisable to rely upon physical means for the regulation of childbearing. For such regulation, the individuals must rely upon nothing but mental control. Mental control secures the humanitarian purposes that inspire birth control, but keeps clear of the spiritual disasters entailed by the use of physical means. Mental control is not only useful for regulating the number of children, but is also indispensable for restoring to humanity its divine dignity and spiritual well-being. Only through the wise exercise of mental control is it possible for humanity to rise from passion to peace, from bondage to freedom, and from animality to purity. In the minds of thoughtful persons, the much ignored spiritual side of this question must assume the importance it deserves. joint responsibility of parenthood. Since the woman has to undertake the trouble and the responsibility of bearing and rearing children, she may seem to be affected more seriously by any possible failure in mental control than the man. In fact, it does not mean any real unfairness to the woman. While it is true that the woman has to undertake the trouble and responsibility of bearing and rearing children, she also has the compensating joy of feeding and cuddling them. Thus, the joy of motherhood is much greater than the joy of fatherhood. Further, the man must also face and shoulder the economic and educational responsibilities for the children. In a properly adjusted marriage, there need not be any injustice in the distribution of parental responsibility to be shared between the man and the woman. If both are truly conscious of their mutual responsibility, inconsiderateness will give way to an active and cooperative endeavor to attain full mental control. In the event there is any failure in mental control, they will cheerfully and willingly discharge the joint responsibility of parenthood. Children must be welcome. For those who are not prepared to undertake the responsibility of children, there is only one course left to them. They must remain celibate and practice strict mental control. Though such mental control is extremely difficult to attain, it is not impossible. From the purely spiritual point of view, strict celibacy is best, but since it is so difficult, few can practice it. For those who cannot practice it, the next best course is to marry rather than fall prey to promiscuity. Within married life, one can learn to control animal passion. It is bound to be a gradual process, and in cases of failure in practicing control, the couple must allow nature to take its own course rather than interfere with it through artificial means. They must cheerfully welcome the consequences and be prepared to shoulder the responsibility of bringing up the children. Physical means become addictive. From the spiritual point of view, birth control must essentially be affected through mental control and nothing else. Physical means are under no circumstances advisable even when the partners seek to use them merely as a provisional and secondary aid without intending to ignore the ideal of developing mental control. While using physical means, they can never arrive at real mental control, though they might truly want it in earnest. On the contrary, they become addicted to the use of physical means and even begin to justify them. To explain still more clearly, what happens in the use of physical means is that while the individuals think that they are using them merely as a preliminary step before mental control is fully developed, they actually get addicted to their use and become slaves to the habit. Though they may remain for some time under the delusion that they are trying to develop mental control side by side with the use of physical means, they are actually losing it gradually. In short, mental power is necessarily undermined by reliance on physical means. Thus, the use of physical means is detrimental to the development of self-control and is positively disastrous for spiritual advancement. It is therefore entirely inadvisable even for the best of motives. Spiritual advancement through married life. In the beginning of married life, the partners are drawn to each other by lust as well as love, but with conscious and deliberate cooperation, they can gradually lessen the element of lust and increase the element of love. Through this process of sublimation, lust ultimately gives way to deep love. By the mutual sharing of joys and sorrows, the partners march on from one spiritual triumph to another, from deep love to ever deeper love, till the possessive and jealous love of the initial period is entirely replaced by a self-giving and expansive love. In fact, through the intelligent handling of marriage, they may traverse so much of the spiritual path that it needs only a touch by a perfect master to raise them into the sanctuary of eternal life. Great chapter. So, how many of you read this chapter before getting married? Ravi, you're one candidate. Had you read this before?
No, I read only with you guys last time, first time.
Okay, okay.
Good point.
Karthik, I just wanted to add, I think what comes out of this chapter is that mental control is paramount importance.
It's a lot of noise on your mic. I'm not able to hear you.
Mamaji.
There's some background noise, if you not mind. Hello? Somebody else
Yeah,
is
go
to
ahead.
mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, what I'm saying is that this chapter is emphasizing, for one thing, I read also here and is also read in Listen Humanity, that somewhere else in Baba's literature is that whether you're celibate or whether you're married, both are, equally eligible for on the spiritual path. So this, because now that, of course, I'm married and I didn't read it before marriage, and it's very difficult to be a celibate. And so there is one another thought which comes to my mind is that where your attention goes, the energy flows. So slowly and slowly we have to, of course, we are married, but we have to train our minds, and then we can move from lust to love. And that is why I had read that. Maybe later on you can read it again, the part which I read earlier, and that has got the significance of this path of how to. It's not repression. It is basically by choice that you involve yourself or with a much more deeper spiritual and other activities, and then your mind automatically will go away from lust. I mean, this is just my thoughts. I'm open to any counter thoughts.
Oh,
well said.
See, Baba said, not only lust, we have a lot of other weaknesses too, right?
Yes.
Anger and the lust are different kinds of lust we have, food and anything that touches our body and we generate pleasure, that's called lust. But as long as we focus on them, we have a problem there. But if we make a diversion, if we focus on loving Baba, then we are diverting ourselves from ourself to loving Baba. Then they automatically come down. All these intensity of cravings and all those things will come back. And Baba himself said that love me deeper and deeper, and that love will erase all your sin, all your weaknesses. That's what Baba said. Yeah, Jai Baba.
Yeah, well said, Ravi. I think so. You can treat cravings as passing clouds and then let them come and go. I mean, and that's the only way to deal with them, because the cravings will come because of our past karmic ties and sanskars. So it is sort of inevitable, but we have to learn how to deal with them and let it go. And of course, there are other techniques like when we read the chapters on yoga and meditation. Yes, some of the tools which we can.
As long as the thoughts come, there's no problem. Only problem comes when we try to act on them. Then the problems comes. So let the thoughts come. Let them go unacted on them. That's what we have to do.
Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Khalid,
go ahead.
Yeah, on page 102, there's a line. I would just want to reread it. It's under the subtitle "Necessity of Clear Choice." The last paragraph, it says, when a sexual relationship is accompanied by a sense of responsibility love, and spiritual idealism, conditions for the sublimation of sex are much more favorable than when it is cheap and promiscuous. Here, what comes to my mind from this line is about live-in relationships. Marriage in the social surrounding, in the social acceptability, it's a ritual. It's a ritual, right? Now, the sense of responsibility can also come in a live-in relationship. So, my query is, is live-in relationship acceptable spiritually, or does it create hurdle on the spiritual path? So can we have a discussion on that?
I think that's very clear, right? The line answers the question, right? So, marriage as an institution is very well preferred to living in, because the relationship is longer lasting, and it is based on values that are higher, whereas a live-in relationship may be more driven by the initial lust and attraction between the individuals. So, in that sense, very clearly, Baba says marriage is a better institution. Others?
Baba also said, marriage. Another point. This is what I heard from Yurich's talk. I never read anywhere, but Yurich said, Baba said, you have to have one spouse. It's very important whether you get married. That's me saying, whether you get married or not sociologically married, but one spouse is the preferred way for spiritual advancement, rather than multiple people or promiscuous relationships. See, marriage is just a sociological entitlement. Correct? If somebody did not get married, they could have gone to a registration office and registered, and then they live together.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about the casual live-ins that are the in thing, especially in India now, right? Where marriage as an institution is not respected at all, and both partners are willingly open to the idea of temporary relationships, and that's I think not surely by this line itself clear that Baba does not support.
Yeah. Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Yeah, Jai Baba. I think we are kind of preconceived that the living relationships are casual, So even marriages are casual. People just marry just for the sake of marriage, but they don't have any commitment to the partners. So even though I don't have any friend or anybody who is in that kind of relationship, but I think what Khalid Bhai was coming from, even living relations could be of a spiritual in nature, and people staying together. And now there are sexless couples. There's a new trend which is emerging. So it is both ways. It is both ways actually. It is up to what relationship that you have. What drives your closeness to the other person is what is important here. Jai Baba.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Interesting things are happening
in the world.
Yeah, there is something for the called friends with benefits. Yeah, it's a social architecture which is required as a setup in the society. The heritage and the money and the family, that kind of a thing. We are looking for that kind of environment of being in a closed, what you call safe haven kind of a thing, that you can fall upon in spite of any other thing. So that's why marriage, and there is a social pressure to pursue the marriage. So in a way, it is good actually that on a flick of your mind you don't break up or anything. It needs a huge amount of commitment to break up a marriage. Commitment in a sense on a negative side. There has to be a real reason that you break up. So social pressures help us to fall in line, listen to the other person, and adjust to the circumstances that marriages put us. So it dissolves the ego in that sense, we can say. Jai Baba.
Yeah, good point. Very good points.
Sanjay, I have a point here. If
Yeah.
it is only social pressure which keeps the marriage going, I don't think it is
Yeah. So I'm
proper
saying
thing.
it's not the only thing. It is helpful actually in a sense that you may live for somebody for 5 years, then you have a big fight, and there is no social pressure. You just go and stay elsewhere, or you break up the marriage without giving a proper kind of a time to adjust yourself. So social pressure in that sense help you because you don't take a decision off your heart actually.
That is
That's what
okay.
that's what I said. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
clearly understood, and
Yeah.
it is a social binding which
Yeah.
keeps the say structure going.
Yeah.
But the other point is, for any spiritual growth, that is not going to be of any help.
Yeah. Yeah. It is helpful because even if I fight with my wife, ultimately I come back online, reconcile to her, console her, put my ego away. So I think it is spiritually beneficial. All marriages, all of us would have had that kind of experiences. May not be you, but we but we have those moments in our life where we are fighting with the partners, but ultimately we put our ego aside and love her again or love him again. So
So
I think it is spiritually beneficial. I think so.
with this background, how do you
Yeah.
see the live-in relationship? That is, I think, the primary aim of a live-in relationship. It is sex without any obligations. Then I don't think
I
it is
think
of any
that's our
spiritual benefit.
perception. I think that is our perception. People may like each other and then stay together. That is the living relationship. Living relationships are just made out of sex. I doubt, but most of them could be. But maybe there are marriages which are just good friends staying together, and then sharing their life.
Few things
So
contribute that
some people
also.
don't believe in the marriage. This is a new the X or Y generation. Some people just don't believe in that, and they keep living together. And after 10 years, they may sometime marry. That
Yeah.
also is there.
Few things contribute also. Number
Yeah.
one is everybody is having a job and they're making a good amount of money, and
Yeah.
they are alone. Number one. Number two is to get married is not an easy thing. It's a big expense. Lot of things have to happen, and that's not easy for every family to go through that. Uh, these are the two things I can come up with. Yeah.
I know the time is up. Yes. But still, can I ask one question?
Sure, go ahead.
In Indian religion, I find Hindu, not Indian religion, Hindu religion per se, promiscuity is very rampant.
Oh, is that right? I thought it's less.
Yes. You know, Krishna having, I don't know, 8 wives. No, Arjuna that's also not like that. Having, I don't know how many. Even the Devatas, for example, Shukra is supposed to be the progeny of, I forgot the story, progeny of 2 other planets mating. you know, out of the, you know, out of the wedlock, outside the wedlock, I should say. And Shukra became, that is why Shukra became the guru of Asuras. I get confused whenever I listen to Hindu religion scriptures. I get very confused. You know, okay, they talk only about sex and promiscuity. Try Shiv Puran. It starts with a rishi, you know, a rishi getting attracted towards a 16-year-old fisher girl, and then illegitimately bearing a child who became something very big later on, you know, something like that. Is the Shiv Purana starts with that story.
Yeah, well, yes, what you said is true, but let's talk about Krishna. Krishna was having 8 wives.
Yes.
Krishna is, we have to realize, he is an avatar. Avatars don't have sexual relationship. They only have wives, and they don't have sexual relationship. They come here for a work. All these ladies who are around Avatar, they are mandali members, apostles, or devotees, lovers, pure love. They don't have any sexual love. That's one thing I can say. Other stories are there. This promiscuity, it is not now. It is there since ever. There are human beings are there. The lust is there, and it's a very strong. Apart from 4 needs, food, water, shelter, sleep. Apart from that, the fourth necessity is the sexual relationship. That's how they get it through wedding. The marriage, living together. It has been there. Even when Rama was going to the forest, it was described in Valmiki Ramayana that some of the men early morning, they're coming from the prostitute houses they're going to their homes in the early morning before the dawn.
Yes.
It was explained in the thing.
Yeah, I have read myself about prostitutes in Dashrath's period.
Yeah. And it's not just confined to only Hindu religion. It's nothing to do with the religion. It is the human aspect of it. Yeah, how we take it, that all depends upon it. But for the spirituality, if you want to advance, if you want to succumb to that lustful acts, you are going away from the spiritual advancement. That's something we have to realize. We have to give up all these pleasures come out of the lustful acts. That's something we have to give up.
Correct. I think the question, Vipul, was about. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
One of you, go ahead. Ashok, go ahead.
Yeah, see, first of all, any avatar is above the realm of duality. So for him, these, human traits of lust, greed, and anger, he's much above that. Once you pass the 7th plane and into avatarhood as a avatar man god, you're much above. You're above duality. Nobody cannot touch you. So I think whatever is written of the perception in the scriptures, or maybe some impressions we get. First of all, the avatar, by whatever name you call, is above duality. And that is very much confirmed in the various literatures which we have read or we are reading. And even in the scriptures of the past, be it any scripture, the God man or the avatar is above duality. Is that something we should keep in mind?
Yeah.
Give up.
Couple of examples of Christ. Christ was never married, and he himself tempted to have that lustful feeling and fallen for it. He himself did that, and then with his own human will, he came out of that, and that's the avataric work. Not that he had weakness like a human being weakness. That's what Baba mentioned about temptation of the Christ. He made himself to be tempted to that lustful Mary Magdalene, and then with his own will, exercising his own human will, not using any of his divine powers of infinite power or any other thing. He did not use any of that. He used, this is what Baba explained about Christ. He himself, and the purpose of doing that is it's something to do with the avataric work. To create this action of avatar helps for the humanity. That's one example I can think of. Muhammad married eight people. So the reason is, at that time, the sex was very prevalent. And I believe they used to just go, and if somebody's wife is very beautiful, they used to drag, if somebody is more powerful, they used to drag the wives and rape them. That's how it used to be. And then Muhammad set an example by marrying only, you can do that. Just for setting an example, you have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if I may come in, all I can say is to respond to Vipul. The proportionality is universal. I think every culture, every history, every like Ravi brought out examples of the Abrahamic religions also making reference to all of this. It is there in everything. So there is nothing that is disproportionate in our culture, is what I would say. And I mean, and surely that's not something of a focus from a spiritual growth perspective. So I think we can let those sleeping dogs lie.
I have a point of view on this. Say the stories that we hear in all the Puranas and other things in the Hindu literature, religious literature available, needs to be taken as a sort of a stories for say some meaning or summary to do or not to do. So actually moral stories. But actually, while we read this or understand, maybe spiritual aspect of that is not taken up, and then only the story remains as a Bollywood story or a Hollywood story. That may be one aspect. The other thing is, say, especially the say stories of a lot of different. I can imagine different planes, like the subtle plane, the mental plane. All these things are depicted in different the Puranic stories. Say, Vishwamitra creates a separate the world for his disciple. So that is a possibility, or a sphere being created, or a mental sphere being created, all these things. So there is a lot of need for understanding each of these stories. But beyond this point, I feel for an ordinary person or one who is not tuned to take anything in real perspective, these are stumbling blocks for the people in the spiritual path. So that your feeling of genuine say disillusionment in say reading these stories and trying to understand why there is so much of sects in Hinduism. That point is taken well, people. Jai Baba.
Very good. Good points.
Very good. Very interesting. So with that, we'll draw close to today's session. See you all tomorrow. Have a great Saturday. Stay safe. Jai Meher Baba.
Yeah, one
Jai-
question. One
Jai
question.
Meher.
My question is unusual. Actually, every time I try to log into Teams and Skype, every time I have to change the password and I can't use the last password, and it takes 10 minutes to redo the whole thing. Is anyone else having, or am I making some mistake?
I think we can talk about this offline, but I don't see, I've not
Yeah.
heard this complaint from anybody.
No,
Acha, okay,
I recently had some problem logging in also, because that may be because I have created some problem here by having different names in different logins. Maybe there is some
Okay.
confusion. How do I come out of this? Is it by, say, uninstalling totally everything and reinstalling?
Just signing out and signing in should take care of it, right?
Okay. Okay.
Just signing in and signing out without the need to join a meeting. You have installed Teams, correct? Both of you?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So just sign out after this meeting and then sign in and leave yourself signed in. If there's a checkbox saying always keep me signed in, select that and leave yourself signed in and then click the link. It should work, is what I feel.
Thanks a
Because
lot.
I've not heard this complaint specifically, so there's not a ready-made response for that.
Thanks
Okay, thank
anyway.
you.
Thanks.
All
Bye.
right,
See
thank
you
you.
tomorrow.
Jai Baba.
Catch up. Jai Baba.
Jai
Jai
Baba,
Baba,
everybody.
Jai Baba, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Jai
everyone.
Baba.
Jai Baba, Vipulji. Bye. All the very bestest for tomorrow. Right? Not today. All the exams tomorrow. Okay, very good. Always there is a first exam, but don't worry about it. Put the full effort. So today no class and the exam. Okay, well. Saket, how can you not eat that banana? What you are thinking? You only have to eat it now. And one more. Oh, yeah, obviously. Don't disrespect food. I keep telling you. Huh?